When you are tracking a guitar, there's a definite difference between, actually we've kind of already covered a lot of this, but there's a definite difference between how you play when you're sitting and you're standing. And I find that for challenging left-hand stuff, I do better when I'm sitting down playing because my hand's right here, I can see what's going on and I'm more comfortable. But I also, when I'm playing sitting down, my right arm is sort of tucked up and I can be kind of precise with my picking, but I can't, I don't have the extension to do big strums. And if something's like a little bit more rhythmically challenging or picking challenging, I find standing up works better for me. And there's also, I'm gonna grab my guitar real quick. There's also a big difference between how people pick. I have a pick somewhere. Sometimes when people sit, they let me turn on this guitar DI. Are you still there? Yeah. So people sit, they have their pick sort of flat against the string. But when people stand, sometimes they're at an angle and they start picking like. So you get all this extra scratchiness. And I think I actually had a little problem with Kenny on the bass tracks for this record where he was picking at kind of an angle to the strings. And it can be a little easier to play faster when you're sort of picking at an angle, but you get this kind of scratchy tone. And you can sometimes adjust that based on whether you sit or stand. And one thing that's important when you are sitting, try to have something around in your studio, whether it's a footstool or a block or something like that, so the guitarist, or a chair like this one that has a leg that you can put your foot on. It's really good to be able to cradle your guitar when you're sitting down and make sure the person is comfortable whether they choose to sit or stand and can play well. And then, so the next thing, I pretty much already covered this whole live room versus control room thing. That's really about feedback. But it's also what the person is most comfortable with. If they are always playing in front of their amp and they do a ton of feedback, then they're going to want to be in front of the amp. There's a couple bands I've recorded a few times. One's called Meek Murder, and the other one's called Trenchfoot. And both of those bands, like those guys are just like super dialed in with what they're going to play, and they're not particularly meticulous about their performances, but they're very meticulous about the idea that interaction with your amp is just the most important thing in your performance. And they'll actually, it's kind of wild. Both of those bands will like track the drums, and then we'll sequence the album. Like, forget about sequencing and mastering. We'll sequence the whole record before we even start tracking the guitars, because they have this specific idea of what kind of spacing they want between each song on the album. And then they'll just go in and just do the whole record in one pass. Or they might do like side A in one pass. Occasionally going back to punch in, but for the most part, it's just like they know that there's going to be like, a short gap between song 1 and 2 and a couple of stick clicks, and they just want it to feel like one big long piece of music. So they'll record it as one big long piece of music, and it's kind of neat to do it that way, and it goes really quickly if they're that confident in their playing and not super meticulous about it. So sometimes I will record someone exclusively in the live room, but for the most part I'm recording people in the control room. And I did want to touch on adjusting how you play for a better recording, which is mentioned earlier when I was talking about the intonation stuff, which is really just, how hard are you strumming, how hard are you fretting, do you naturally sit in a way that you pull the neck back when you play, or do you sort of play balanced on the lower horn of the guitar where you're pushing the neck forward? And how does all that stuff affect your intonation, and how does it affect your ability to play in tune? Just try to be observant, especially if you're an engineer who happens to play an instrument. Try to be observant how the person you're recording is playing their instrument, and say like, hey, you know what? If you just sat a little bit differently or angled the guitar a little bit differently, maybe you'd play better. Or maybe you'll see them like playing a riff in some bizarre position, and you could suggest like, hey, you know what? Instead of playing it over here, you could play it over there, and the fingering would be a lot easier. If you have some knowledge about how to play guitar, it's a lot easier to share that information with that person. And the same goes for drums or bass, vocals, piano, whatever it may be. The more instruments you know how to play, the greater your musical vocabulary will be, and the greater your ability to communicate with the people you're recording are, because you have a certain empathy for the position that they're in. I'm not a particularly great drummer, but I can play well enough that I have a good understanding about what a drummer goes through when they're recording and why certain things are possible and what things aren't possible. So when I'm communicating with them, I can kind of speak their language and say like, hey, let's try this, or do a double stroke there, or do a flam here, or take a dump there, or whatever it happens to be. And same with guitar, bass, vocals. Just if you have a rudimentary understanding of how to play all those instruments, then you can be a better support system for those players. Help them adjust their playing to record better. Okay. So another thing about guitar tracking is I think a lot of engineers, when they hear a mistake, the flag goes off. They're like, okay, oh, stop, dude, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. People don't necessarily want to hear that right away. Let them do a few takes all the way through and figure the song out for themselves, and let them build a little momentum, let them get warmed up, and let them get familiar with the actual take. I mean, they might know the song well, but they might not know the actual take that they're recording to well. So let them get familiar with that, and let them build some momentum as they're tracking. So don't interrupt them immediately. Let them get through the song at least a few times before you start picking it apart. And then, of course, be supportive and provide constructive criticism as you're doing it. Then there's the choice of, do you want to double track the guitars or not? And in most cases, of the type of bands that I'm doing, the guitars are double tracked and hard panned. You don't always have to. Double tracking certainly widens the sound, but also kind of can lessen the amount of intimacy you feel in the sound. A single guitar, a single performance, fewer microphones is usually a more pure sound and will give you more the sense of being there, whereas like double tracking will give you more of a sound stage and more like a concert kind of vibe, and quad tracking will do so even more. But with each layer that you add, you're adding size, but you're removing punch. So just keep that in mind as you add layers and add microphones and add ambient mics and all that stuff. So I'm going to skip over this idea of the voice for now. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Then creative versus clerical linearity. What I mean by clerical linearity is sort of the admin stuff that you're doing as you're recording guitars. You're sort of thinking ahead about like, oh yeah, we got to get, there's two guitarists playing on this song, and we have like maybe 2 or 3 guitar sounds that we're working on in this song, and but we're doing a whole album, and we're going to be using this, tone 1 on a bunch of spots in the album and tone 2 on a bunch of spots in the album. So from an engineer's perspective, you're thinking about it, just the clerical linearity is like, set up this guitar tone, record everything you got to do with this guitar tone, then move on to the next guitar tone, and do everything you got to do with that tone. But musicians don't usually think that way. And if you have sufficient time to set up a bunch of little rigs within your space, and you can follow the way that creative linearity works, I think you'll end up with a better product, more cohesive product, and a product that you are more sort of invested in because you understand the artistic intent of the song better. So if it's possible, let people complete on their guitar overdubs. Let people complete a song at a time. Get through both the primary rhythm track, and if you're doing a secondary rhythm track, the secondary rhythm track, if there's alternate tones for that song, if you can do them on the fly, do them on the fly. If you have to do them later, that's fine. It's up to, but sort of put that. Don't tell the client that they have to record in a certain way. Ask them what they prefer to do, and if they would prefer to really focus on a song at a time rather than a sound at a time, then be malleable and do it that way. If there's 2 guitar players in the band that are sort of playing an even amount of stuff, once guitar player 1 gets warmed up, they might want to keep going, and you might want to wait to go back to do the second guitars on those first songs with the second guitar player, or maybe it's more important for them to do to get through all of one kind of song. So just bear in mind as you're tracking a song what will work best creatively for the client. Let them build not only momentum about their ability to perform the song, but the build momentum just in the creative process and letting them see through whatever it is fresh in their head.